I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Friday, April 26th. Our first story takes us to northern Manitoba, where back in September of 2021, Brent, Denechezhe, and Leona Tssessaze were fatally shot at their home on Northlands Denesuline First Nation. Now, Manitoba RCMP have announced charges against their suspected murderer. On Monday, officers went to Fond du Lac, Saskatchewan, to arrest Leon Paul Mercredi. Charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, it's believed he set the residence on fire shortly after the double homicide. The RCMP's lone suspect, Mercredi, has been remanded into custody in Winnipeg. And following his arrest, Mother Ellen Tssessaze wrote a statement read here on her behalf.
For the last 3 years, I have thought about it every morning and wondered what happened to my daughter Leona and Brent. Wondering what happened to her. On Tuesday, we were informed of the shocking and devastating news of how she was taken from all of us. My heart was broken all over again. It hurt so much. I appreciate the RCMP telling me what happened, but at the same time, I wish I didn't know. I thought she had died in a fire. To know she died the way she did takes my breath away. She had a life ahead of her, a good life, and it was taken from her.
To Ottawa, the site of ongoing global plastics treaty negotiations and a press conference featuring members of Aamjiwnaang First Nation. Located near Sarnia, Ontario, in so-called Chemical Valley, the First Nation was forced into lockdown last week due to toxic air pollution from nearby petroleum refineries. Traced back to a malfunction at the plastic-producing chemical plant Ineos Styrolution, high levels of benzene led to its closure. And yesterday, environmental groups called on the federal government to keep Ineos closed until Aamjiwnaang is satisfied air quality standards have been restored. Band councillor Janelle Namabin says her community remains locked down and that some members have become sick. She says Indigenous peoples need to be included in plastic treaty discussions.
With UNDRIP being adopted, it needs to be included in the plastic treaty because the people impacted by plastic pollution from extraction through pipelines to refineries to microplastics are the ones that most impacted, mostly Indigenous people around the world. It's worth mentioning that the environment I live in is a result of inadequate regulations, monitoring, and enforcement.
There's cause for celebration in Kahnawake this week. A gathering to mark the 40th anniversary of the groundbreaking agreement which led to the Cattery Memorial Hospital Centre. Back in April of 1984, the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake signed a nation-to-nation agreement with the Parti Québécois government. The first of its kind in Canada, the agreement was the product of intense political negotiations. The late René Lévesque was premier at the time. Son Claude was in attendance at this week's special event. Grand Chief Kasanahaway Sky Deer and Quebec Indigenous Affairs Minister Ian Lafreniere spoke at the ceremony. Joe Delarond was on the anniversary event organizing committee.
The real issue back then, 40 years ago, was in order to get a new hospital, with the changes in the way the government worked, healthcare went from Canada to the provinces, and there was no mechanism at the time for the province to help to fund a new hospital. So they came up with an agreement that allowed for Quebec to change its legislation so that they could fund and work together to get this new hospital. So it was groundbreaking at the time.
Hi, I'm Dennis Ward, host of Face to Face. Coming up on our next episode, I'll be sitting down with lawyer Julian Faulkner. We'll be discussing the latest calls for the disbandment of the Thunder Bay Police Service and much, much more. Tune in Tuesday on APTN or listen to the Face to Face podcast for an extended interview. Download and subscribe on your favorite player.
And finally, First Nations governments in both the Yukon and the Northwest Territories envision a new future for the pristine Peel watershed. Sarah Connors explains.
The Peel watershed is a place of pristine wilderness. It covers 74,000 square kilometers, from its headwaters in the Yukon to its confluence with the Mackenzie River near Fort McPherson in the Northwest Territories. The Gwich'in and the First Nation of Nacho-Nayakdun consider its delicate ecosystem to be a place of significant cultural importance.
It is our homeland and an area that many of our families lived in for thousands of years.
Now, those homelands may become a national park. The Gwich'in Tribal Council, Natchonayakdun, and the territorial and federal governments are conducting a feasibility study to potentially open a national park inside the watershed. The park would be co-developed and co-managed with both nations and Parks Canada.
We can be a destination for domestic and global tourists to see and hear how the Gwich'in have lived in this area for thousands of years.
In 2019, the nations and Yukon government signed the Peel Watershed Regional Land Use Plan. The plan ensures 83% of the watershed is protected from development. Parks Canada says a national park would further ensure the watershed is permanently protected.
It's very strong protection. The mandate is built around protection, education, and providing visitor experiences to all Canadians.
The chief of Natchonayakdun says a national park would benefit the land and its people.
This is a great opportunity for us all to ensure that those lands are respected and protected for all time. And continue to support the traditions and values of our peoples.
The feasibility study will cost around $2 to $3 million to complete, but there's no timeline for it yet. More engagement with communities has to happen before the park can go forward. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Friday, April 26th. I'm Rick Harp.